The Detroit Lions walked into the 2026 offseason carrying something they haven't had in decades: expectations. Not just playoff expectations, not just division title hopes, but legitimate Super Bowl aspirations. And when a team reaches that level, every single move in free agency gets dissected under a completely different microscope. This is no longer about rebuilding or even retooling. This is about sustaining a contender, and that changes everything about how you evaluate what General Manager Brad Holmes chose to do over these past few weeks. What makes this offseason so fascinating is that, on the surface, it doesn't look like the kind of aggressive, splash-heavy approach fans have been conditioned to expect from a team going all in. There were no massive headline signings, no blockbuster deals for elite pass rushers, no jaw-dropping contracts that shook the league. Instead, what Detroit did was far more calculated, far more deliberate, and arguably far more difficult to execute. They chose discipline over excitement, sustainability over short-term buzz, and depth over star power. And that's exactly why the reaction has been so split. You have one side of the fan base looking at the departures and feeling uneasy. Losing players like Khalif Raymond, Alex Anzalone, and Amick Robertson isn't insignificant. These were contributors, culture pieces, players who understood the system and played meaningful snaps. When you also factor in the release of Taylor Decker and the trade of David Montgomery, it becomes clear that this wasn't just a minor reshuffling. This was a structural shift in parts of the roster, especially on offense and along the line. Then there's the other side, the one that sees the bigger picture. The Lions didn't just randomly let players walk. They made calculated decisions based on value, age, positional importance, and future cap flexibility. And when you zoom out, you start to see the blueprint that Holmes has been following since day one. This is a team that believes its core is already in place. We're talking about players like Jared Goff, Penei Sewell, Aiden Hutchinson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Jahmyr Gibbs. That nucleus is expensive, and it's only going to get more expensive. Holmes made it very clear that Detroit's priority isn't to chase outside talent at the cost of losing their own stars. It's to keep that foundation intact for as long as possible. That philosophy is what dictated everything we saw in free agency. Take the edge rusher situation, for example. This was arguably the biggest need on the roster heading into the offseason. Opposite Hutchinson, the Lions have been searching for consistency for years. Names have come and gone, but nothing has truly stuck. So naturally, fans expected Detroit to go big here. Maybe not top of the market, but at least a significant investment. Instead, they signed DJ Wonnum to a one-year, incentive-laden deal. At first glance, that feels underwhelming. But when you listen to Holmes explain the reasoning, it becomes much clearer. Once the Lions committed significant money to the offensive line, particularly with Cade Mays, they essentially priced themselves out of the premium edge market. And rather than forcing a move or overpaying for a marginal upgrade, they pivoted to value. Wonnum isn't being asked to be a star. He's being asked to be a complementary piece, someone who can set the edge, contribute in rotations, and provide flexibility across the defensive front. In that role, his value could significantly outperform his contract. But it also means Detroit is still relying heavily on Hutchinson to be the game wrecker. That's a calculated risk. And it's not the only one. Look at the offensive line, where the Lions made some of their most impactful decisions. Moving on from Taylor Decker was a bold move, especially considering how important stability is for a quarterback like Goff. But instead of chasing a high-priced replacement, Detroit brought in Larry Borom and made a fascinating bet on versatility. Holmes openly acknowledged that Sewell's ability to play both right and left tackle gives them flexibility that most teams simply don't have. That one factor changes everything. It means the Lions aren't locked into a specific positional need heading into the draft. It means they can prioritize talent over fit. And it means Borom doesn't have to be a long-term solution to justify the move. Still, there's real risk here. Protecting Goff is non-negotiable. He's at his best when the pocket is clean, when the structure holds, when he can operate within rhythm. If that protection falters, the entire offense can feel it. So while the flexibility is appealing, the margin for error is thin. At running back, the decision to move on from David Montgomery and bring in Isaiah Pacheco is another example of Detroit redefining roles rather than simply replacing production. Montgomery was a tone setter, a physical runner who complemented Gibbs perfectly. Pacheco isn't a carbon copy, but he brings toughness, pass protection, and short yardage reliability at a fraction of the cost. This is where you start to see the pattern. The Lions aren't trying to replicate what they lost player for player. They're reshaping the roster to better align with how they want to play moving forward. The same logic applies at wide receiver with the addition of Greg Dortch. Replacing Khalif Raymond isn't just about production, it's about role, chemistry, and special teams impact. Dortch may not have Raymond's explosiveness as a returner, but he brings toughness, reliability, and a team-first mentality that fits perfectly with Detroit's culture. He's the kind of player who won't dominate headlines, but can quietly win you games with key third-down catches, smart decisions, and consistent execution. And in a roster built around stars, those role players matter more than ever. Now here's where things get really interesting. Despite the lack of splashy moves, not everyone is down on what Detroit has done. In fact, one ESPN analyst ranked the Lions' free agency class as one of the top 3 in the entire NFL. That evaluation wasn't based on star power. It was based on context, efficiency, and value. And that's the key word, value. Detroit found contributors on low-cost deals across multiple positions. Players like Roger McCreary, Damone Clark, and Christian Izien all have pathways to meaningful roles without requiring major financial commitments. This approach allows the Lions to maintain depth while preserving flexibility, something that becomes critical as the season progresses and injuries inevitably hit. But let's be real for a second. Value doesn't win championships by itself. At some point, you need difference makers. You need players who can take over games, especially in January. And while Detroit absolutely has those players at key positions, the question is whether they've done enough around them. This is where the NFL draft becomes everything. Because what free agency didn't solve, the draft now must. If the Lions hit on their picks, especially early, this offseason could look brilliant in hindsight. If they find a starting caliber edge rusher, a reliable offensive lineman, or another defensive playmaker, suddenly all those one-year deals and low-risk signings make perfect sense. But if they miss, or if they're forced into drafting for need instead of best player available, the cracks could start to show. And that's the tension surrounding this team right now. They've positioned themselves for flexibility, but they've also left themselves with responsibility. Now, right in the middle of all this, if you're enjoying this kind of deep dive breakdown and want more NFL analysis that goes beyond the surface, this is the moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're going to be tracking every move, every draft pick, and every roster battle as the Lions push toward a championship window that is very real right now. What makes this entire strategy even more compelling is how consistent it is with Holmes' long-term vision. He's not chasing one Super Bowl run. He's trying to build a team that can compete for multiple years. That's why he's prioritizing extensions for homegrown talent. That's why he's avoiding bloated contracts in free agency. And that's why he's comfortable making unpopular decisions if they serve the bigger picture. It's a philosophy that requires patience, discipline, and confidence in your scouting and development systems. And so far, Detroit has earned the benefit of the doubt. Their recent draft success speaks for itself. Their culture is strong. Their identity is clear. But this is the NFL, and windows close faster than you expect. The Lions are no longer the hunters. They're the hunted. Every opponent is circling them on the schedule. Every weakness will be tested. Every gamble will be exposed if it doesn't pay off. So how do you grade this free agency? If you're looking for immediate impact and star power, it's hard to go above AB. There are too many question marks, especially at edge rusher and along the offensive line. But if you're evaluating based on strategy, value, and long-term sustainability, there's a strong argument for an A-. This is a front office that knows exactly what it's doing, even if the results aren't instantly flashy. And ultimately, that's what this comes down to. Do you trust the process? Because the Detroit Lions are betting everything that you should. As we move closer to the draft and eventually into the season, every one of these decisions will start to reveal its true impact. Some will look like steals. Others may come back to haunt them. But one thing is certain. This offseason wasn't about making noise. It was about building something that lasts. And if you want to stay locked in on every twist and turn of that journey, make sure you subscribe right now, because the next chapter of this Lions story might be the most important one yet.